I call this meeting of the Clear Creek Independent School District to order. Let the record show that a quorum of board members is present and that this meeting has been duly called and that its notice has been posted in accordance with Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code Chapter 551. We have a quorum of board members, and we'll move on to community input. No community input, so we will move on to action item A, consider approval of human resource report.
We don't have any additional comments today.
No additional comments?
No.
So I will ask for a motion.
Mr. President, I move that we accept the superintendent's recommendation and approve the human resources report.
Thank you for that motion, Mr. Bowen. Do I have a second? Thank you, Mr. Sanchez. Seeing no further comment, I'll call for a vote. All in favor, please raise your right hand. And that motion carries unanimously. Next, we'll move on to information and discussion. Action item A, advanced placement program evaluation.
Happy to welcome back Dr. Henley. And Dr. Silva is Dr. Henley will walk us through this evaluation, advanced academics. And I think that we do have Mr. Zavala's here to help answer any questions on that too. So we will go ahead and turn that over to Dr. Henley.
Thank y'all for having me this afternoon. As you have in the full report, it's a lot of data, so I'm going to try to condense that down into a simplified presentation. So we move into our advanced placement program evaluation. We've aligned this evaluation to our community-based accountability report under student readiness, and then aligned to the supporting the needs and aspirations of students, as well as the strategic plan under the student agency achievement and growth for expanded learning opportunities for our students. And because we want to continue our profile of CCISD learners, we did connect it to 6 of the 8 C's under creators and critical thinkers, where students are moving beyond recalling and understanding and into more of the analyzing and evaluation. The communicators and connectors, where we are synthesizing that content across different units and courses, as well as compassionate and confident, where they're becoming more developed and stronger in their academic studies. To complete this program evaluation, we aligned it around 3 research questions. Really, what are the advantages for students to choose advanced placement coursework from their perspective? How the CCISD advanced placement participation and performance trended over time. We included data from within CCISD and then from outside CCISD. And then to what extent does advanced placement instruction give students that deep and complex learning from both student perspective as well as teacher perspective? To answer those questions, we looked for our student survey data, so that's that student perception on the coursework and taking the exam. We looked at our CCISD AP data trending over time for participation and performance. We did 5 years for participation. We included 7 years for performance for our own internal data, and I'll kind of explain later when we did that. And then we compared ourselves geographically and demographically to surrounding districts, and that's that publicly available data through TEA. And those are a little bit different because they're 11th and 12th graders that tested within that school year. And then we asked our teachers to, we did AP teacher survey to gather data for that AP teacher perspective. And so what we found when we answered research question number 1, what are the advantages for students to choose advanced placement coursework? And they named the top 3. The first advantage was it was college credit for them. The second one was an exemption to final exam. And the third was an adult encouraged me to take an AP course. Sorry, no, exam. I'm going to confuse myself. So an adult encouraged me to take the exam. Other reasons included AP credits more widely accepted perception compared to dual credit in the state of Texas and outside the state of Texas. Also, reasons to not take an exam. The top 3 were they were unsure if they would pass, the cost, and then may not fully have understood the content. We also found another reason that they didn't take it was that it didn't fit their personalized need. So maybe the plan that they were going to college, it wasn't going to fit in that degree plan, and so they chose not to take the exam for that reason. So when we gathered student perception on reasons for taking the AP course, the top 3 that came in were it was a bonus to class ranking, so it's their GPA. It's easier to fit in their schedule than some of the dual credit options available. And then it was prestige on their transcript. So when they're applying to those colleges to have that listing of AP coursework, gave them. Another reason they indicated was also that it was, that boosted that GPA as well. So when we asked them to rank order of importance, whether deep learning, academic engagement, complex thinking, and preparation for the future, and list out which course, the top 3 that came out of those 4 relative strengths for taking an AP course, AP Capstone, a math and computer science, and science courses ranked in the top 3 on all 4 of those areas. It ranked in the top of the re-enroll, so we asked, would you re-enroll in a course? Fine arts bumped up into one of the top 3, as far as I would re-enroll in a course and retake it. So then, that was research question number 1. Now we're jumping into research question number 2, and this is our participation and performance trends over time. So for our intra-district participation, we looked at 5 years. For our performance, we included 7 years worth of data, even though our norm is typically 5 years. And we did that because we wanted you to see performance in that COVID years. And then we did inter-district participation for 5 years because that's the most available data from TEA on the TAPA report. So we did compare ourselves to Alvin, Pearland, Dickinson, Santa Fe, Friendswood, Deer Park, LaPorte, and Pasadena, as well as Plano, Louisville, Humble, Keller, Mansville, Round Rock, Leander, and to the region and to the state. And just as a reminder, that inter-district is only 11th and 12th graders that take an AP course that school year. So what we found, intra-district participation, we saw an increase in the number of math and science courses taken, and a little bit of a decrease in English and social studies, and you'll see the trend lines for participation for the last 4 years. And obviously in the full report, there was a breakdown on pages 16 to 18 by content area. You'll see intra-district participation trends also included a decrease in the number of unique testers. And a unique tester are the students that are taking the course, or no, unique students are the students that are uniquely taking the course. Unique testers are the unique students that took the test. They may or may not be the same. But you'll see a decrease in the number of unique testers, but a consistency in the average number of tests taken per student over the last 5 years. That declining trend is also for most subject areas, including participation in math and computer science, and relatively flat participation in both the science and the arts. And that information was on pages 19 and 20 in the report. When we looked at intra-district performance trends, we did this again for 7 years, and this information was on page 21 and 22. We saw an increase in overall performance in the last couple of years. So in 2020, it was 66.4% performance, and we have moved up to 68.9% this last year, which is the highest passing rate for the 7-year period. Prior to the 2 years prior to the disruption, there was a decline. Page 22 broke down the passing, the scores 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You'll see we had a reduction in the number of 1s and 2s, but an increase in our 4s and 5s. So our students are performing, but they're also performing higher on an AP exam. So now we're going to move to continue on our performance trends. So we took all of our courses and picked the largest tested subject per content area. So we picked English language composition out of the English language arts grouping, human geography, physics 1, and calculus AB. And you'll see that the sample regression, this is overall, you'll see a decline in our English language arts, but an increase in our human geography, performance, physics, and calculus AB. The full breakout of the analysis for each core content course is in the Appendix C of your report. So now we get to inter-district participation. So we did the last 5 reported years from TEA, and this is information from the TAPR. And again, we compared ourselves to geographical location districts as well as demographic similar districts, and region and state. And this table is sorted by the latest participation, which is 2019-20. So you'll see that overall we're in our ones that we ranked, we're at 7, we're 7th in those. And again, that's the 11th and 12th unique testers. This does not include 9th or 10th graders in that calculation. When we look at performance across those same districts, you'll see a slight increase in our overall performance. So with those districts that we compared ourselves to in the last those 5 years of reporting categories. So our last research question was really the teacher perception. So in the beginning, we talked about student perception, and so now we're really talking about teacher perception. And so we align those questions along those same category areas of deep learning and student engagement, high complex thinking, preparing for the future. And you'll see that 92% of the teachers agree that AP coursework deepens the learning based on the extent of the content and how deep it goes, the rigor and the application of knowledge that those students have to do in that course. 86% agree that AP and course increases student engagement, and that's because of the high stakes nature of the course. It's a higher GPA, there's an increased rigor, they go deeper, and that peer group collaboration, there's more of a focus on students talking to one another and supporting their own learning. 96% agree that AP coursework stimulates complex thinking, and that's that higher order skills. And that's because they have to draw those conclusions, investigate, explore, and report and their own conclusions through that Socratic seminaring, through the free response questions, from the document-based questions. 77% agree that AP coursework prepares students for the future and through academic skills and their own personal attributes. When we asked what characteristics that described those personal attributes and leading to success, was motivated, hardworking, willing to learn, and dedicated. So just kind of concluding that whole thing, we found that data could indicate a change in student perception of purpose, utility, and reward for AP course credit, just based on the student responses of why they take a course versus taking an exam. Earning college credit and boost to GPA are primary motivators for AP. This performance trend, we're rising, we're steadily getting there, and our AP teachers do recommend the AP program overall. So that leads us to some recommendations. And the first one we really thought was to explore additional options for advanced coursework. And that leans toward that focus of personalized learning for the student, and that AP is a very vital part of our curriculum. But are there other options to personalize that learning for the student? We also wanted to recommend to develop a consistent communication plan that really provides the purpose of AP courses and exams based on that need and goal of the individual student. Provide opportunities to share strategies across those non-AP courses. When the teachers indicated that these strategies for deep learning, high complex student engagement were so important, how could we scale that out to non-AP courses? And then the last one was to really ensure we have support structures to develop that student AP readiness. So before they sign up to take a course or get into advanced academics, that they have a full understanding of both the readiness for enrolling in the course and or taking the exam. So that is a summary of the Advanced Placement Program evaluation.
Right.
Any questions?
Thank you, Dr. Henley. I'll open it up for any question or comment.
So I'll start. Feels like I usually do. So one question I had that I kind of wondered if y'all looked into. I really liked asking the question of students, why didn't they take the AP exam if they were in the AP class? But did we ask students who were not in any AP classes why they didn't take an AP class?
That is
that something
question.
we looked at?
Not for this program evaluation, because it was for this survey went to the students enrolled in an AP course.
Yeah.
Haven't we done something like that though? Thought
Trying to remember.
Back, I want to.
it would have been about 4 years ago, I think, when we were talking about.
Would have been in advanced academics.
program evaluation, like the grader evaluation, maybe 5 years ago, even 5 or 6 years ago.
Because kind of where my mind goes with this, I know we all love telling the story of how we did a program evaluation on the GT program in elementary schools. It was before I got on the board, but after looking at the data showing that some students were underrepresented in that population, we decided to start testing every student, and we found that corrected itself. And so I kind of wonder if there might not be some kind of similar self-selection, or maybe I guess there are some students who maybe would succeed in a single AP class or all AP classes, and they just don't realize yet that they would.
Right.
And if we had some kind of way of encouraging them to go into the AP program or try an AP class or something like that, then it might kind of get them over that hump, and they would realize they can actually succeed in the AP environment. And so I don't know. I don't know what the solution to that is, but I would love to know why students are choosing not to take AP classes given all of these benefits.
I wonder if I agree with that, and I wonder too, in thinking about the recommendation about the consistent communication plan, it's almost more about these are options you have and this is how it could benefit you, because I think some of the it's that they might be scared or worried they won't be successful, but also I don't know that we really have a very consistent communication for everybody to be made aware, and I think that's why we talked about that after looking at the data, which we could definitely loop in some pieces that for students that maybe haven't taken one yet to figure out a way to target some of the communication to them as well.
In the past, we've had jumpstart programs for students in intermediate school to try and advertise and entice students at that level, because that's really where it needs to happen. If they intend on taking AP courses and doing well, we need to encourage them to take honors courses they're now called honors courses, but at the time they were pre-AP at high school, and then I guess advanced or honors courses at intermediate. But we had those for several years at least. And then certainly there was a big disruption with COVID. And I think even prior to that, I think we had slowed down on offering the Jumpstart programs because we had kids going through for some of the STAR programs.
Yeah, I mean, my dream here, and I don't know how realistic this is, but I wonder what would happen if you just kind of set a default expectation for all 8th graders as they go into 9th grade that it is, unless maybe you take a form home and have your parents sign it or something like that. I mean, there needs to be a little bit of an effort barrier not to do this. It is kind of the expectation that every incoming freshman tries taking one advanced academics or AP class. And I just kind of wonder what would happen if we did that, because I suspect there are a lot of students who don't even realize they would succeed and are maybe kind of counting themselves out a little bit.
Agree. Yeah, Mr. Zavala, do you want to respond to that a little bit?
Sure. So just a couple of things. First off, with just the being qualified for GT services is different than going into that advanced coursework because it is self-selected.
Right, but GT used to have an element of being self-selected also, and
you had to be recommended for evaluation.
And so what we found was that there was an imbalance among students. Like, I mean, the ones who were most well-to-do had a better chance of being recommended because they kind of knew the process. Their parents knew the process. Their parents knew what questions to ask. And so I just wonder if a similar effect might not be happening here, where the kids whose parents are really looking out for everything they do academically, or who have a lot of means to get them the extra help they need, are pushing them toward AP classes, and then the kids who don't have all of that are going toward the level 2 classes.
No, absolutely. And I think that well, currently this year, even at the intermediate level and at the 9th grade level, we've done Jumpstart or whatever you want to call it. Different campuses call it different things to encourage kids to at least try one advanced course in any subject. Just try one to try to encourage that one.
Okay.
I do think too, the participation, if I'm correct, in AP Human Geography is very high. And that's that freshman, somewhat of a gateway class, to encourage the AP coursework. But that is one of the highest participations in trying to get students into that.
And I guess kind of on a related note, did you look at how many students are taking each number of AP classes? I mean, is there kind of a gradient from students taking 0 to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Or is it, and I'm including advanced academics in that just because the grade levels would kind of make that messy anyway. Or is there a pretty clear, there are some students who take all advanced, there are some students who take no advanced, and not a lot of space in between? Which, have you looked at kind of which pattern we see?
I don't know that we pulled that information for this particular report. It's probably something that we could get for you to look at if you want to see the comparison of the number of courses for AP and honors versus the balance.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess I'm just interested to know, among the high school students, how many, do we see there's one informal track of advanced students, one informal track of non-advanced students, or are there some who kind of pick and choose?
That would be interesting.
Yes, it will be interesting to see.
I mean, obviously, if we knew that, what we would want to try and do is push some kids into that middle category if they could handle it.
Sure. Agree with that.
And I do know, I was thinking about that from about 5 years ago. We found out that for kids taking multiple, sometimes that was a barrier because of the expense. If you're taking 4,
The exams.
Exams,
right,
yes.
and they're $75, dollars a piece or thereabouts, then you're talking,
And that was a barrier even for
$300, yeah.
students in here, was the cost of the exam. So they take the course, they don't necessarily take the exam because of the expense.
Right. And I know we did something for our low-income students to kind of make it,
Financially in the report, there is a cost savings for economically disadvantaged students from
Right.
College Board, where it is significantly less.
and I've slept since then, so bear with me. But I think we had talked about possibly if students had performed like a 4 or 5, that we would have that cost with them or something like that. I'm stretching.
I don't remember that.
Okay, I'm stretching. So I didn't know if that was something viable or something,
We were brainstorming that. It was like one of my very first meetings. So I think over the summer, we talked about that, but it might have been like in a retreat or something. We were
Gotcha.
trying to come up with
Okay.
ideas, and I think
maybe that's it.
someone suggested
So
that.
forget I even said that. But no, thank you, and I appreciate the question because that gets us thinking, especially when we think about Vision 2030. How do we kind of push our students and maybe stretch them a little bit? But one of the questions that I had on the first recommendation, can you give some examples of what that would look like? The alternatives to an AP exam or anything like that? I didn't want to put anybody on the
No,
spot, but
to me, the thinking behind that is we want to try to give the kids as much opportunity as possible. When you look at other districts and things that are being offered in advanced coursework, there are other things that we can explore that are out there to make sure that what we're doing for our kids is the best thing.
Okay.
That's the thinking behind that.
Yeah, I kind of wondered about that too, because I know we've looked at IB before, and I think there are pretty good reasons not to take that on. That's a big reason. but other than that, I don't really know of any other coursework systems other than AP and IB for advanced academics. I think there's like a classical education one that I've seen, but those are really the only ones I'm aware of.
So there's one that's been growing in America, but they're international, is Cambridge is an example of another one. They're the ones who actually early on partnered with College Board. College Board contracted with them to create the AP capstone courses. So they're the ones who created that. So it's through Cambridge University and it's internet, but that's just an example of another one.
Fantastic. And Stanley, I forgot to welcome you too.
Yes,
I think this is the first time you've addressed this, if I remember correctly.
I was here
For
at
dual
the beginning of the year.
dual
for-
credit.
Okay.
Or dual credit.
Dual credit.
Yes,
Okay.
dual credit.
Okay.
And AP.
Well, welcome.
Thanks.
Oh, and AP. That's right.
And AP.
Mr. Sanchez.
Mr. President, I did have a question about I think it was on page 72 in the packet, and the first bullet talks about data could indicate a change in student perception of purpose, utility, and reward for AP coursework. And so my question is, as we think about things that have been discussed in Vision 2030, as we think about the space in the kind of in the intermediate kind of school-aged range that we were targeting, are there some things that we could do to help incentivize or to expand what students might think is possible that would give them greater confidence as they go into high school? That may be the experience that some of our students in some of our magnet programs experience, but may not necessarily be the same messaging or to the same extent. And I just didn't know if there's any opportunity there.
So, yes, I think so. Something that we're working on with all the intermediates, because they all wanted to be pilots, is to take the depth and complexity work from Jay Taylor that we utilize, that we use a lot, or is used a lot in the gifted world, but it's not intended just for gifted, it's intended for all kids when you look at the research. So it's just learning through, they did research on how do experts analyze something, what do they know about their content area. And so there were 11 different lenses. So the intermediates are going to send cohorts to a training to become trainers of trainers, so that then they can all go back and spread it on their campus, working with their principals. So hopefully that will help enrich some of that as well and give teachers tools.
That happens, and that'll be in the fall when we start that? Or?
This May, we're starting the
Conversation
training.
in the training.
Yeah. So hopefully this upcoming year, they'll be able to present it and share with their staff.
Thank you.
Mr. Larson?
Forgive me if you covered this while I was roaring up 270 here. But I noticed there was quite a bit of what I would call benchmarking data where we compared ourselves to other districts, and both in utilization and in pass rate and outcome. And I was just curious, is there any kind of outreach to some of the districts that had good results to see if there were any best practices we could adopt?
Yeah, I think that's also part of the, I guess, fourth recommendation is looking at how we're supporting those students. Because yes, I've started looking into what are those other districts doing as far as that, in helping students who might not be willing to take a regular coursework, and what do they do to help those kids.
Okay, all right. So that's an ongoing outreach kind of
Yes,
thing.
sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, if there's no further questions, I was just going to say, one of the things that you shared, and I saw it in, I think, two of the recommendations, the consistency across the district. I think that's key. And as I turn around and look at Dava, that's key, And that's one of the things, I don't want to say that's frustrating, but that's one of the things, you know, I like to look at with our high schools, is making sure that regardless of if it's brook, if it's lake, if it's springs, you know, falls, creek, wherever, it's that consistency in message. So if we're going to encourage our students to take AP exams or stretch themselves, I want to make sure that, you know, everybody has that opportunity, and more importantly, they aren't hurt, you know, for trying that, because that's what we're trying to encourage is, hey, we want you to, you know, step out on a limb. You may not think you can do it, but, you know, your teacher recommended you from 8th grade or what have you, you know, and it's that consistency in message that, you know, don't be afraid to not try, right? And give it a shot. So I appreciate all the thought and, you know, all the data and information. I think Mr. Bowen brings up a pretty good, you know, point about, you know, thinking of ways to kind of get all of our students to maybe try an AP course. And then Mr. Larson, and I know you guys are doing that in terms of reaching out, evaluating other programs, especially like school districts that are just like ours in terms of demographics and, you know, student population and things of that nature, to kind of take a look at, you know, hey, are we missing anything? What are they doing? How do they, you know, encourage, you know, et cetera. So I appreciate that, and thank you for the presentation.
It's my pleasure.
And next, we'll move on to our budget update.
Okay, good afternoon. So today is our first look at the budget. We have a busy next several months up through September with all sorts of different requirements that we'll go through and processes we'll go through, and the ultimate approval of the budget for fiscal year 24, and finally the tax rate adoption in September. So tonight, what I wanted to do is give a brief update on the budget timeline for this year. I wanted to give you an update on where we stand with the current year's budget. Talk a little bit about what we're seeing with legislation coming through. Go over our ESSER budget funds, give you an update on we're in year 2 of those funds, and then finally give you a first look at the budget forecast for fiscal year 23-24. So I've listed out the activities that we have coming up over the next several months. The first thing on the list is the board will be discussing and approving board budget assumptions, goals, and priorities. This is usually something that's been done earlier in prior years. This year we have it in May. We have a couple groups that are developing their budget priorities. We have Cabinet is going through our budget priorities. We have a DEIC subcommittee on budget that's prepared theirs, and we also have our Citizens Financial Advisory Committee priorities, and so we'll present those to the board just so that you can see the different groups and what they have on their mind as far as budget priorities for next year as you develop yours. With the legislative year, it presents a unique challenge every other year. It's a wait and see to see what's going to happen with the budget and all the new legislation and funding that relates to school finance. In June, we will review the preliminary budget. We'll review a tax rate proposal and compensation plan. When we get into July, we're hoping that at that point we'll have enough information. We'll be able to recommend a compensation plan for the next year for you. At the July board meeting, we'll also schedule our public hearing to discuss the budget and tax rate. And then several things happen in July. We'll start getting our certified tax values from our Harris and Galveston Appraisal District. We'll also receive approval from the Texas Education Agency on our tax rate, maximum compressed tax rate. Finally, we'll do the budget update in August with ultimately approval, budget hearing, and adoption of the 3 funds that the board is required to approve the budget on. That's the general fund, child nutrition fund, and debt service funds. And then finally in September, we'll adopt the tax rate. So a brief budget update on this year's budget. We are currently, one of the drivers of our revenues is always our enrollment and corresponding attendance, student attendance. So our current enrollment is sitting at 40,649. Our K through 12 enrollment, which is what we're fully funded on, is 39,301. Our attendance rate is sitting at 93.9%. We are coming in lower than we had expected for our ADA, and so you'll see the impact of that on our budget, on our revenues. I'm happy to say the attendance rate seems to be slowly popping up a little bit more. It's better than it was last year, so that's good news. It's still about almost 2% lower than pre-COVID levels, though. The formula transition grant is running lower. This isn't impacting our overall revenue. It just means that our total revenue is where it should be, but we're generating more from different things that go into the funding formula. Attendance and some of our special populations are generating more funding, and our target revenue with formula transition grant is going down. As our ADA goes down, our target revenue goes down, and that ultimately reduces our formula transition grant. So I have a slide and a couple slides that you can see how that's being impacted. Another item that I'm happy to say is our interest income. So we're about probably $3 million higher in revenue this year versus what we budgeted, and that's because of all of the interest rate increases that we're seeing. So that's a good news about interest rate hikes. And then SHARS. SHARS is the school health and related services. This is a federal funds that we receive for the various services we provide as a school district to students in special ed that receive medical services. We did have an audit this year, and some of the services that were provided were disallowed for SHARS funding, so we'll see a little bit of a decline in that revenue this year. And finally, on the expenditure side, we're about 7 months into our budget. It looks like our expenditures are running on target. We have watched that payroll closely every month just to see where it lands. We do anticipate our property insurance renewal, which the board will look at this month at the board meeting, to be possibly up to 30% higher. So I should be getting that information in any day now. And then we do expect just a small savings on our budget to actual, but as we go further into the budget year for this year, we'll have a better idea of where we stand with that. So just a little bit about our enrollment and attendance. I'm providing you a 5-year history. You can see our enrollment topped about 42,379 students back in 2019. We're currently sitting at that 40,649. And you can see with the blue bar what our attendance rate has done. We're sitting at 93.9% right now. So it's better than it was in 2022. Still not quite as good as the pre-COVID years. I also wanted to take a look and show you what our 4-year enrollment history is looking like. I wanted to see specifically if you take pre-K out of the picture, because pre-K can kind of make things a little confusing to look at. Our pre-K students were only funded by the state at 50% for a half day. So if you look over, you can see that big dip in fiscal year 21 where we lost the almost 1,600 students, or 1,642 students. You can see a lot of those were the pre-K students, but 1,100, just over 1,100 were actually K through 12 students. We saw another decline in fiscal year 22. And then this year, from this time last year to this year, we've seen another decline at 445 K through 12 students. So we are seeing an increase in our pre-K, our early education students coming through. So that's a good sign. But that is in looking at our revenue, our state revenue, this is what generates it. And so that's what's has taken a hit over the years. The formula transition grant, this has been very interesting to watch. So just as a reminder, in House Bill 3, the school finance legislation passed, made changes to our funding formulas, but it did leave CCISD and other districts around the state with less revenue to educate our students. And so what happened was they put the formula transition grants in place to ensure that we received 103% of the funding we would have received under the old law. And this grant, as you know, expires in the fall of 2024, so we have one more year with it. Historically, we've not added that fifth golden penny. The board is not elected to do that, as under this financial scenario, under this school funding formulas, it would not have generated any additional revenue to the school district. So we remained at only utilizing 4 golden pennies in our tax rate. However, if you look at the chart at the bottom, you'll see the first year of a formula transition grant, we received about $9.6 million in funding. You can see our target revenue. It's based on $8,240 per ADA. If you look across the chart, you'll see our target revenue start to go down, and that's all as a result of our ADA declining. So our target's going down, the funding formulas are generating pretty much the same for the past 2 or 3 years, the same amount of funding, and so ultimately it's just causing that formula transition grant to go down. Again, it's not impacting our total revenue, it's just we're seeing things in place where we're starting to pull out because of the data of being a formula transition grant. And as we go a little bit further in the presentation, you'll see that I anticipate we will not receive any formula transition grant funds next year because the lower target revenue and also some of the changes that the state may be putting in place with funding the basic allotment is bringing our revenue up. The other good news, a piece of good news about not being a formula transition grant is that as some of our special population groups numbers go up, we'll start seeing additional revenue for that rather than the additional revenue just being offset by other state aid or by the formula transition grant. So on our 22-23 budget update, the budget this year was approved with a $9.2 million deficit. We had anticipated that we would, last year's final numbers for August 31st of fiscal year 22, we saw a deficit of $9.2 million. We pulled about $9.4 million out of the capital and contingency fund to transfer that over to the general fund to offset that deficit. So our general fund stayed intact with no, still at having an excess surplus unassigned fund balance. And then our capital and contingency fund was reduced from 66 to about 56 million. The budget that the board approved last August had a deficit of $9.2 million that again, our plan was to take that from capital and contingency. And with the current revenues and expenditures that we're anticipating, I think it'll be about 10.5, but it's going to land somewhere in the ballpark. So I think we'll be very close to what we had originally, the board had originally approved. So the legislative update, as a reminder, our number one school funding priority was to ask the legislators to increase the basic allotment and incorporate a cost of inflation supplement in each biennium. It's looking like the state is setting aside $5 billion for school finance. It was earmarked by the House. Amount has been earmarked by the House this session. One thing that I find interesting, so I wanted to put it up here, is our basic allotment that's the amount we receive per student in attendance, and it's currently at $6,160. Each $100 in that increase in that basic allotment costs the state about $1.4 billion. So if you do the math and say, okay, if the state were to just put all of their $5 billion into increasing the basic allotment, that would provide about a $350 increase to school districts across the state. That's not the way that it works. Those funds, the $5 billion in funds, are going to be utilized for many different things, and that's our challenge as we go through this legislative session, is figuring out where they're going to put the funds and how it will impact the district. So they are talking about a higher school safety allotment. They are talking about which would definitely benefit Clear Creek, a higher, smaller, mid-sized district allotment. That's not an allotment that we're eligible for, and increased teacher incentive allotment, in addition to several other items, which I'll go into in a little bit more detail. But I just wanted to make sure that even if $350 was, it's a little disappointing to me as the CFO, so I would have liked to see more, and so that's we're watching to see how they will divvy up the funds. So this slide really gives you a good idea. This we honed in on House Bill 100 to see what is going on there. It looks like a $50 increase in the basic allotment has been slated. Last week we did hear that Representative King was working on an additional some additional legislation that would bump it up by $90 next year and another 50 years in fiscal year 2025. It does include currently any increase in the basic allotment that school districts receive. We are required to use 30% on increases for teachers, nurses, and librarians. This particular bill would bring that up to 50% of any additional revenues utilized on increases. Some of the things that would help CCISD, it does significantly raise the minimum salary schedule. So our salaries are already several thousand above what the state requires. However, the difference in that, we do have to pay additional TRS contributions on that. So with this change, it would actually reduce what we have to pay the state in TRS contributions. So that would be a benefit to CCISD. It also, one of the things that's been going on really over the past couple years is there's been a special committee looking at special program, special education funding, and trying to gear the funding that the state generates to be more in line with the services that we provide in the types of special education programs that we have. So we do anticipate some additional funding generated for special education allotments. There is some verbiage about extending the formula transition grant, also increasing transportation funding, which currently it's $1 per mile that we receive as a reimbursement. It would raise that to $1.54, so that would increase our funding. They are looking at creating a new math pathways allotment. We're researching that, and creating a new fine arts allotment. And finally, there is a possibility that they would add a 6 golden penny that would actually give the board the ability to add a 6 penny without voter approval, without going to the board. Right now it's just 5 golden pennies. So the legislatures they're looking at, I think I've seen anywhere from 15 to 17 billion for property tax relief. The House and Senate approaches differ on how they'll do that, but what we've seen is a tier 1 tax rate compression. So what that means is our tax rate that we have on the maintenance and operations side could see a reduction from anywhere to 7 to 15 cents. The state would compress that, and that would be before the board added or approved any additional golden pennies onto that. Currently, that's at 0.8046 per $100 of value. They are also looking at a 5% appraisal cap on all real property. So currently, we have a 10% appraisal cap. So if your value of your home goes up over 10%, that value increase is limited to 10%, and then the following year it would go up for the remainder of the increase. Another item that is a large item is they're looking at increasing the homestead exemption. This is a state mandated homestead exemption. It's currently at $40,000. They would raise that to $70,000 and also increase that over 65 and disabled to $30,000. The challenge from a budget perspective this year is that would require a constitutional amendment to be approved by voters in November. So if we're approving our tax rate in September, it would be that any of these changes would be retroactive to tax year 2023. So we would, excuse me, have to include all of these changes in our numbers when we're doing our truth and taxation calculations during the budget year. So two of the, had my staff look at certain expenditures that we incur and that we have seen large inflation increases in over the past several years. So I wanted to just be able to show some of the things that we're dealing with as far as those inflationary increases would include fuel. Our fuel for our school buses, we've seen a 33% increase in our fuel cost. We've seen a 41% increase in our general insurance policy. Sitting here on the coast, we have certain costs that other school districts that are inland do not have. And our windstorm policy is a very large policy with a large premium. We've seen a 12% increase in the cost of paper. That's directly impacting our teachers, our campus budgets. They cover those costs in their own budget. Garbage pickup costs, 17%. Health insurance, which is for many, many years seen inflation rates higher than just regular inflation rates, has seen a 17% increase as well. And then finally our food costs, which they're covered through our child nutrition fund, but they've seen at least a 12% increase as well. So if you took that basic allotment that we currently receive and think about the average inflation since 2019 being 17%, that would, if the basic allotment was tied to inflation of 17%, our basic allotment would need to be over $7,200. So when we think about they're providing $50 to $90 increase in the basic allotment, it's a little bit, we have some challenges ahead of us. I also wanted to show what some of the things that we have in place in the district, some of the programs and the services that we provide, show you what we expend on those services versus what the state provides funding for. Of course, the biggest is our special education services. So we spend about $47.1 million general fund dollars on special education. We receive the state covers about $34.8 million, so they cover about 74% of that. Pre-K is at about 58%. Dyslexia services, which is another huge program that we have, is covered at about 33%. You'll see our transportation services, we expend $13 million. The state covers about $2 million of that. And then finally, if you look at our school safety, we spend $5.6 million per year. The state gives us $400,000 per year to cover those school safety costs. So there are some big differences in what we expend versus what the state covers. And we just picked these 5 because these are easily tracked and we have specific state allotments that come through for those specific programs. I'm going to jump very quickly to our just a one-page ESSER update for you. As you know, the district received $36.5 million over a 3-year time period as a result of the pandemic, and the funds we're in the middle of year 2, and we're pretty much progressing about 50% expended. The funds, as provided, we were able to utilize them on some new programs or incentives and some we're also able to supplant some of our general fund costs and move those over to ESSER. And at a time when we were losing so many students and dealing with inflation and also dealing with low attendance rates, these funds have helped us kind of weather that storm and help our general fund out with some of these costs. So this funds are currently funding 24 positions. Now that we're starting to near the end of the ESSER program, we'll start seeing some of these costs having to be returned to the general fund. We have about $1.5 million that we're expected to return back to the general fund next year, and another $10 million the following year. We have been able to charge an indirect cost to the ESSER program, which counts as basically revenue in the general fund. We charge the grant a indirect cost rate, and in turn that counts as revenue in the general fund. So I've highlighted or asterisked the items that overall we've funded over the past 2 years out of ESSER that will return to the general fund. Of course, the largest is our electric utility bill. We have been covering through ESSER. We also have several staffing units. It's currently funding 24 positions. Most of those, with the exception of maybe 5 or 6, were current positions. So they were not new positions that we added due to this grant. We also have several software programs that we're funding out of here that we had moved from general over to ESSER. We were able to provide about $2.3 million in intervention, payroll or intervention services to our students, utilizing extra duty pay. So those campuses were able to have a set of funds to use for those needs, intervention needs for our students. We were able to purchase some instructional materials. Most of that was in the form of student laptops and staff laptops. We did cover some substitute costs out of this grant, and we did add some, utilize the funds for some professional learning for our teachers as well. We also had some pandemic, just reopening costs a couple years ago, just nursing costs and things like that that we were able to use these funds for. So I mainly wanted to give you this update just so you, as a reminder, can see as you look 2 years down the road at our 2-year forecast, that $10 million returning back to our general fund is, we've known that was going to happen, and that's something that you'll see the increase in expenditures for that year, and that's mainly what it's coming from. So when I prepared the fiscal year 24 forecast, keep in mind I'm using an old template for the funding, to put the assumptions in. That has not come out yet, and until we get more information and know how the funds are going to be generated, it's an old template based on old law. So some of the things that I'm using for or assuming for next year's budget is a projected enrollment of 40,590. It's a slight decline. We're going to get another demographer update for the spring. We should have that in a couple weeks, and so we'll have hopefully a better idea projection for next year if we utilize that data. I'm keeping the attendance rate at what we're seeing right now, 93.9%, and resulting in an average daily attendance of 37,200. I'm anticipating property value growth of 5%, and I've built these budget assumptions on the current 4 golden pennies that we have on our tax rate. I did build, even though they're saying $50 to $90, I did build a $150 increase in the basic allotment in these assumptions because I didn't increase any of the special allotments. So I think it's reasonable and probably I think we'll generate more revenue from some of the things that the state has going on than $150 in the basic allotment. So I think at this point in time, it's a reasonable assumption. And then I also have put into the projections that you'll see, staff has been working on looking at ways to reduce our expenditures, ways that we can increase our revenues for next year. And so our target has been $6 million. We're not quite there yet, but we are on the way, and we're making progress with that. So I've built that into our assumptions, into the budget forecast. I've also, the only compensation increases that I have included in these assumptions are any that are mandated by the board. And so I talked about that 30 to 50% compensation increase that would be required as a result of the state increasing our basic allotment. And that's all that I put into this. So the two-year budget forecast, as you see, we've got our adjusted budget for fiscal year 23 that I showed you in the previous slide of a $10.5 million deficit. If we move over to fiscal year 24, the revenues and expenditures you'll see are mainly, the changes that you'll mainly see are the revenue that's built on the $150 increase in the basic allotment. We do have some the expenditure reductions built in here, but we've also have the salary increase built in as well under the expenditures. This, under current law and with those changes, we're looking at a $16 million deficit. If we look at our capital and contingency fund as is, with the beginning balance of about $40 million after taking the funds out for the fiscal year 23 deficit, that would result in us needing 39.6% of the capital and contingency fund and bringing that down to 23.8 million for fiscal year 24. That would leave our general fund balance as is with no impact to it. Going over to fiscal year 25, you'll see that's where our that $10 million in ESSER costs return, and resulting in a 28.8 million possible deficit. So these numbers are very large. They're built on several assumptions, and until we really figure out where the funding is going to come from or how the state is going to allocate the funds, it's very hard to really pinpoint what those numbers are going to be. But as we go through the next month or two, we will be watching that carefully. So going over to our next steps, we've had a lot of discussions going on about this, and as I said, state legislature's decision on the basic allotment and other funding model changes is really key. So as we get closer into May, we'll start being able to estimate our revenues much better, especially towards the end of May. Again, those $6 million in reductions that will be applied to our budget, and we're still continuing to identify any cost-saving measures we can. We do have concerns about our compensation plan. We know that we've heard that there could be some changes in our health insurance rates. If you recall, last year TRS Active Care actually reduced the premiums, and we passed those savings all on to our employees, and most of them saw reductions in their health insurance premiums. The reason that TRS was able to do that was because they received federal funds due to the pandemic, and so unfortunately now those funds are gone, and the state will have to increase those premiums to be able to meet their claims costs. So we're waiting. Probably will not know about that until June, what the state will do with TRS Active Care. We do expect right now employees contribute 8% to TRS. That is set to go up to 8.25% next year, but we've also seen legislation come through raising that to 9%. So that would be about a 1% additional contribution on an employee's salary that would have to be contributed back to TRS. We are in the process of identifying any additional cost increases as well. I mentioned property insurance earlier. We are looking at software renewals, all sorts of things, just to make sure that we have all of those covered. And then really our next step has been the creation of a strategic budget sprint team with Dr. Ingalls and Ms. Polson's help. We are looking at creating a group pulling from our Citizens Financial Advisory Committee to do some sprint teamwork in May to look at what our options are, whether it's revenue producing or further expenditure reductions. What are the things that we can do on that side to, you know, if it's an expenditure reduction and sort of rank them of what has the least impact on our educational services that we provide and you know, kind of get a tiered approach so that we can come back and provide some recommendations to the board as we go through this challenging budget process. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that, Dr. Engel?
No, I think, yeah, we really have kind of exhausted some conversations in cabinet, you know, about what we can, some cost reductions, and we have done that. Close to $4 million at this point, just kind of with staffing, and now we're looking at other things that we can generate, but really we need a broader lens to get some other input, and so that we can come up with some ideas, and then like you said, maybe tiered, this might be option for this year, the following year, and then bring those to the board for some consideration.
I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you, Alice, number one, for that update. I'll start us off first, just the comment that I think it's page 89, that slide of what the district pays versus what is reimbursed is eye-opening, to say the least. And then, you know, I wanted to go ahead and thank staff for already kind of, you know, getting the ball rolling and looking at, you know, some cost-cutting measures and things of that nature. I know never an easy conversation, but, you know, thank you for already getting a jump on that. So I'll open it up to any questions or comments.
Here, I'll go first. And I'm operating with great restraint because I know it's a moving target that we're not done with yet. Thank you all for all your work, and I know planning ahead is very difficult with so many things out there. A couple of comments and specifically one question with that. House Bill 100, I don't see Bonin on here listed as a sponsor on it. Have we had much discussion with him about the effects of that bill on our district?
You want to go ahead? And actually, we've been having a lot of conversation, and we're having a legislative meeting tomorrow afternoon. We have already a draft of just some of the, as things change, things are moving pretty rapidly, and as of where it stands right now, we're going to have some recommendations that we might like to kind of concur on and then share that.
Yeah.
We're prepared for that.
I saw him bang the gavel the other day,
We did
but
contact his office last week, but he is the
Yes.
chair of the appropriations committee, and
Right.
we're fully into House Bill 1. And so his director was asked to give him a little bit of time.
Okay. Yeah, I was looking at one originally, and you mentioned 100, so I went and looked at that one. Didn't see him as a sponsor. So yeah, those relationships are so important, and we all know that. So you know, observations along the way. Again, it's moving targets, but things that we've been looking at and talking about for the last several years. You know, losing ESSER funds of $30+ million and 17% inflation practically makes this, you know, just, I don't know, it's mind-boggling, you know, that we're going to figure out, we will find a way, you know, through this. Your committee, your Citizens Advisory Committee, and that I know you'll meet with, ideas, things that are coming out of that, you know, I hate to mention the golden penny thing because I know, you know, we voted last year to say let's not put it on the table, but is that something that, you know, the committee is, you know, saying maybe that's the solution, or is this all still a let's wait and see what happens in Austin?
So at the last meeting, it was a small group, but it was, we had some good discussion about that. There was discussion about our tax rate over the years has been reduced so much. You know, the question is, is it to the detriment of
increase.
programs, and there's, you know, some educational needs there because it's, you know, it's a the state compresses that rate and then they make it up, and, you know, so, but there was discussion about that. There was discussion about the need for making sure we're looking long-term at 5 years out, so we can see that what impact that we have on the capital contingency over time. There was talk about holding off on you know, just our expenditures and not sacrificing inside the classroom as far as compensation increases, staying competitive, especially in the areas of the staff that has direct contact in the classroom with the students, and also the school administrators, because that's, you know, just they have that direct student support, and so I think it's, you know, we're developing those with them, but those were sort of some of the thoughts that it was a productive meeting, the last meeting we had. So we'll
Still,
finalize
any
those.
ideas that they have, please share them, because you never know, you might get one of those ideas from an engineer or, you know, a realtor. You never know.
Right.
And it may be a good idea. Your forecast on salary increases, I didn't hear a number. What were you kind of going at, 1%, 2%, 3%?
So the number I used was generated, this is what you're required to, from the funding formula, this is what you're required to use, and I think it came to about 1.5%.
Okay.
So it's I really just, I think about a 1% increase usually runs about $3.3 million for the entire district, and I think there was about $4-something million that was generated to be required to spend for salary increases or compensation increases, and that's the number I included.
Yeah, I think this past year, the 2% cost us around $8 million. I think it was like $8 million or so. And originally, you know, there was the thought recommendation of a 1%. We wanted more, you know, so we went with 2. So I was curious about that on the forecast. Yeah, you know, it's a difficult situation for all of us to be in. You know, the value of the schools is so important because it will affect the real estate as well in our community, and every homeowner, you know, they want to live in a, you know, good school district, and they're willing to pay more for that house. So, you know, we've got to keep in mind that, you know, this discussion earlier about, you know, AP and everything, we want to be that we are a district of innovation, and we've got to, you know, keep that bar set high, because, you know, this will happen, but keeping focused on, you know, a quality, you know, a high quality school district, I know we'll continue to do, and, you know, get through it. So I know it's a lot of hard work, but it's not over yet. It's a lot of information.
Anyone else? Mr. Bull?
Well, I know anytime we have these discussions about enrollment, what I always bring up is opening enrollment. And I mean, that's an idea that we've had in front of us for several years and been able to do. But you look at this enrollment graph, and I know we hoped that enrollment would recover, but it looks like we are still about 1,500 students in the hole. And there are thousands of families in the area around us who would gladly enroll their students in CCISD if they had the opportunity to do so. And so especially if we're going to go into discussions about increasing taxes or golden pennies or anything like that, one of the big options in front of us is that we can open enrollment, and that funding would follow them into the district if we did. And so if we can't naturally increase our enrollment the way we've been hoping to, then that is a way that we could cover that gap very quickly. And if we had done that a couple of years ago, then it would already be up and running, and the magnitude of this problem would be a lot less than it is right now. So I know the best time to plant a tree is 10 years ago, and the second best time is right now. But I think that's an option that we need to take very seriously and very quickly.
Yeah. Can I just comment on that real quick? You know, from a real estate standpoint, when you open, my comments just a second ago, when you open enrollment to people that don't live in our district, it makes the real estate values potentially become at a level or even potentially go down, how would that affect our budget, you know, if our values of our properties didn't continue to increase?
So usually what's the way it works is if our state funding generated or let's see, our tax revenue goes down, our state aid goes up. I'd have to play with it to
It's just a
give you
slippery
final
slope
answer.
whenever you look, and I'm not only speaking to this from my business perspective, but if you talk to a homeowner, you know, and you say, yeah, now you don't have to live in the boundaries of CCISD to go to CCISD. And that will potentially, with your hypothetical, there's that hypothetical also that our values, you know, that our homeowners, you know, values, you know, suddenly stop growing, stop increasing.
And it's important to remember too that as we've seen in cases that have come before us before, not every family going to CCISD is a traditional homeowning family. We have students who are in complicated custody situations. We have students who are living with grandparents. We have students who move into and out of the area all the time, or are living in apartments, or are renting, or have temporary situations. And so there's probably some number of students who, through no fault of their own, have had to leave the district due to changes in their family circumstances, who would gladly keep going here if they had the ability to. And so we do know that if the mechanism by which we collect more revenue from property value growth is due to appraisal growth, which it looks like the legislature might limit anyway. And even when that happens, when appraisals go up, mechanistically our rates have to go down. We are limited to a 2.5% increase across the board. And so if property values across the board don't go up as much, our rates don't come down as much. And we still charge no new revenue plus 2.5% like always. So the growth in property value is completely disconnected from how much money we make as a district. And eventually we might even get to a point where it hurts us because we would have to start paying recapture. And we're not at that point yet, but it could happen someday.
But you're talking about affecting people's pocketbooks that,
I have to agree with you on this one. I think as a taxpayer, you want your property values to stay high, and this could potentially drastically bring property values down. And that's not necessarily reflecting what Ms. Benzai is talking about, but that's reflecting the taxpayers. And when they go to sell their house, they're not going to get as much for their house because they bought it
because
in our district.
we are locking students out of the district and paying millions of dollars a year to do it. I just want every option looked at, and that's a big one.
And that's certainly something that we can evaluate and look at as part of this sprint group and get the details of what that would entail of doing an open enrollment.
Right. That strategic budget sprint team, you know, we really are looking at revenue generating ideas as well as cost reduction. And, you know, and really, like you said, getting business people, getting a broader look, that finance committee, some of those representatives are really putting that together. Because we have been doing a lot of that work, and you need a more of a bird's eye view on that. So that is kind of what we'll come back with at least some recommendations to staff, and then we can continue to bring those for discussion.
That gives a good point. I would like to see, and I'm just throwing a hypothetical out there, what a 1,000 student increase, maybe a 2,000 student increase, and possibly a 3,000 student increase, because I think those might be feasible numbers versus maybe a 1% decrease in property value, or a 2% or a 3%, and see where that falls out. I think that would be fair.
I think so.
I think that would be a fair assessment of, you know, if we do something like that. And then also we have to be cognizant that the reverse can happen too. Somebody could say, well, I want to send my kids, and I'm just using this as an example, to Friendswood, for example, or a neighboring district possibly. Those are always things that you have to keep in mind.
Yeah, and as part of that, I would like to know which districts around us already have open enrollment, because a lot of them do.
We can provide that information.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Any other question or comment?
Yeah, I've got two general subjects I want to talk about. And the first general subject would be not so much enrollment as it is daily attendance. And I keep trying to put numbers on things so I can understand them a little better. And if you look at our old attendance rate and our new attendance rate, that represents the difference between an average student missing 8 days a year versus missing about 11 days a year, if my math is correct. So that it's 3 days. And what does that mean in terms of money? Again, just multiplying the numbers out, I get about 6.3 million. So roughly half of our shortfall is, more than half of our shortfall is just making up that ADA number. Now, I recall that when we had our meetings with the rest of the Gulf Coast region, we talked about this. One of our talking points was we need to be careful about transitioning from enrollment-based to ADA-based or vice versa, and we anticipated having a higher ADA. And now, looking at these numbers, I think to a small extent, the shoe is kind of on the other foot. So one thing I'd like to ask is, what kind of a handle do we have on why that rate has changed? And the first question I would ask there is, and this isn't so much for you, I know this is an input to your spreadsheet, but I think we do have the right people in the room to at least think about this, is to what extent are those absences excused versus unexcused? Because we don't get paid either way. And, if it's been an increase, a 2% increase in unexcused absences, that's one issue to deal with. If it's a 2% increase in excused absences, that's a different issue to grapple with. So do we have any information on that? And if not, can we pull that together?
I don't know that we have that right here, but we can absolutely pull it together. And I know from the past 3 years, starting with the COVID, we were kind of held harmless on attendance, and we were very concerned about anybody coming to school that, was ill. And so as we've kind of transitioned out of that, I'm going to say Ms. Hughes and Mr. Franklin have done an outstanding job this year of we have reinstated attendance-based exam exemptions and some really serious things to try to bring that back to pre-COVID, if you will, expectations and an attendance. Do y'all want to address any of the things that y'all have done? I mean, I've seen a lot of activity on encouraging that attendance. We will get the numbers as far as excused versus unexcused. It's interesting data, and we absolutely will gather that.
I would say ours, anecdotally, without the data fully behind us here today, I would say they're still mostly excused. There's a lot that are still going out with. We still have rounds of coming back from whatever infections that are pervasive still out and about in our community. But we have put measures in play. I think about even Ed White, let's check out with the incentives for attendance and for goal setting and naming, noting, posting, sharing with parents, educating parents, working with social workers and attendance officers to reinforce attendance. All of those pieces have been in play. We've tried to take a creative as well as a systemic approach to cycling back around that. But I can say just in tracking our trends, and we're sharing that data with the leaders every week. There's still a lot of excused. There's still some illness that we're having doctor's notes for.
Okay.
But I don't know, secondary, I know it may be different.
I mean, we've done different things with semester exam exemptions in both fall and spring that you as a board approved last year. So like that's showed a little bit of a growth in attendance rates. We've done some things that are intermediates for incentives for both for the fall and for the spring to just try to incentivize the importance of attendance. And So I feel like some of those things have improved. We're looking at a 1% increase from last year at this point. I think if I'm not mistaken, Alice, that we've watched it kind of increase even after spring break, which is really uncommon. And I would assume that if we go back and look at the trends, typically after spring break, there's a little bit of a drop in our attendance rates, but yet we're seeing a little bit of a rise, not a lot, but it's not going down, which is a positive there. So I do think that some of the things that we put in place have brought us some
And there's pre-K. We still have an issue in truly of attendance once you start pre-K to attend every day and every day counts. That's an area of continued impact that's weighing on us.
Well, I wanted to say I've seen the efforts that you've made, and they're commendable. But to me, it strikes me as they would really, I don't want to say they're focused more on unexcused absences, but they would, certainly things like incentives would tend to have more of an impact on that. If they're excused absences, it doesn't matter, what kind of incentive you give. If you're coughing and hacking, you're not going to be in class. So I just think getting that data would help us maybe achieve a little clarity on that. But thanks for your efforts.
And I'll say your numbers were spot on because it's about a $2 million revenue loss for each 1% that it goes down. So.
The other conversation I wanted to have is, about the budget in general. And, if I just kind of wind the clock back a year, maybe a year and a half, when we were looking at this, it seemed really clear that our biggest problem was the formula transition grant, and that goes away and kind of the bottom kind of drops out of everything. And so we knew we needed help on that. So if I look, and again, I'm just trying to wrap my head around the numbers here, because we've got numbers in millions of dollars that we're short and numbers in per student. And again, this just to help me out, when I looked at that, each 1% I think was around $4 million. And so looking at that, well, let me come back to that. Not each 1%, each $100 per student was around $4 million because we have 40 to 41,000 students, right? Now I'm back in sync. So with that in mind, we come up $150 per student, and yet we're still short by about the same amount that we were looking at. And so that kind of put me off my, kind of rocked me back a little bit. I'm trying to figure out where that's coming from. Then I figured out that assumes no motion whatsoever on formula transition grant. So let me see if I understand this correctly. When you say in this presentation that we're out of the formula transition grant, that means it expires and there's nothing else there.
No.
Okay, that's what I want. That's okay. The other alternative I wanted to.
Because we still have, it's still going on for fiscal year 24. But the way the funding formula works, our target revenue's down because of attendance. And when the state starts putting in more money in the basic allotment, we generate more money. So if we're generating more than what transition grant is guaranteeing, we're not going to get a grant. We'll get additional funding, but you only get the grant when your target revenue exceeds what your revenue generated comes to in taxes and in state funding. So next year, you can see that it's kind of going down. Well, next year, that target revenue is going to be below what the state funding formula will generate because of, when you increase the basic allotment, if you put in another $150, you're generating more money. And so
what I think
so there will be districts that get it next year, but under the data that I'm seeing, we will not be one. It doesn't mean that we're losing money. It just means that now we're generating more money than what the formula transition grant guaranteed. as an
Okay.
increase.
So if I can kind of rephrase that, I was thinking of this a year ago in terms of, well, if we can just get the formula transition grant fixed, we're fine. But now what I'm seeing here, and if I understand this correctly now, we would no longer qualify for it.
Right.
So getting that fixed doesn't help us anymore.
No.
Got it. Okay, I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Ms. Sanchez.
I was just going to say, Alice, I think going back to one of your early slides, I think the stat of average inflation since August of 2019 increasing by 17%, I think is one of the probably most significant things that's making it challenging for us at a time where the basic allotment has not increased and is still at the 6160. And I think you mentioned if it was at least adjusted for that inflation to 7,207, I think the conversation we would be having would be different. And ultimately, it's not because we're missing the mark. It's not because we're unable to force students to come to school, but recognizing that there are still things, there likely are things that happen throughout the pandemic that are impacting families and how they believe, what they believe attendance looks like. That's out of our control, but I think we're taking steps to incentivize and motivate students to come to school because we know it has a direct impact on our budget. If we think about the state making an adjustment so that it would recognize that 17% inflation, I think it allows us to have conversations as a district that more reflect what we're committed to doing for students in CCISD. I think it allows us to be creative and think about what does it look like if we open up enrollment, but I'm not sure that necessarily would be a driver to trying to solve a basic allotment that has not been adjusted since 2019. So I guess I think it's important for us to go back to what was on some of the earliest slides that says, we're still operating in a very lean way. We still spend 90% of our budget on salaries, 90% on salaries. There's a very small trade space for us to do something that solves a challenge that the state is not meeting its obligation to support teachers and staff and the cost that it takes to turn on the lights and to provide the systems that are required to run a high functioning school district. And so I think that's what we have to come back to. And so I think the discussion is helpful and it's good for us to think about all these scenarios. Unfortunately, we don't control what the state's going to do to increase for inflation. And so what you're doing is helping us think through what are the ways that we can get to where we need to be. But I do think we have to really continue to push for the state to make decisions that more accurately reflects the cost of what it takes to educate our students, especially during a legislative session where there is a surplus that exceeds how much the state can actually spend this year. I think that's really, really key. And so I appreciate you working through all the scenarios, and I think the discussion is really good, but I do think we have an obligation to expect the state to step up in of all legislative sessions, this one where there's an extreme surplus.
And I would say what's happened over the past several years with legislation is they have really tied our hands. They are controlling our maintenance and operations tax rate by compressing it. They control funding we receive through the funding formula many times. We want funds that we can use how we see fit, that, for example, by tying, if they're going to give us an increase in a certain allotment, but then tell us we have to spend it a certain way, it limits what we can do and how much we have available to cover the cost increases that we're seeing in paper and safety and these different types of things. So that's the challenge is we're limited on what we can do on the tax rate side. There is some ability of the board on that side make some decisions. But as far as the funding generated, we're limited with that too. So they've, over the years, they've really limited our options with the way that the funding formulas are set up.
I'd like to, again, come back to some numbers here because they gave us $150 per student. That's about 1.1%. And if you look at, I think the maximum number she gave out was $350 per student. Each $100 is another $4 million for us. So at $350 million, that's another $8 million. We're still $1 million or $2 million short. So I don't know how we can square that circle. Unless somebody in Austin finds even more money, I don't know where it's going to come from.
Can I chime in? I completely agree, and I'm very interested to see the stats of the unexcused versus the excused, because I really do think like the attendance and just that small percentage that you're talking about, that is a big chunk. I think one thing that was kind of an unintended consequence, and maybe it will help, it'll be interesting to see the comparison, is now that we've implemented those teacher work days, I know I've heard from parents that they're taking advantage of those, and maybe that's their long weekend. And I would hope, if looking at the numbers that he's asking for, that maybe the unexcused is dropping, and the excused, which we know will happen anyway, is the one that's the high one. But I would be very interested to see if the unexcused is going down once we've made that change with the teacher work days, because that is giving the parents the opportunity that might have pulled their kids and had an extra day off to do a long weekend, is hopefully taking advantage of those days, and see if that kind of played down the road. I think another thing is, though, we also need to, and I think the elementaries and middle school, I know, are doing a really good job of these encouraging parents to bring their kids to school, but I think at this point it's reaching out to the community and expressing like, this is how you can help, is making sure that your kids show up to school and the importance of that at all the grade levels.
I have to say, Ms. Polson's office has done a great job of a whole attendance campaign from the very beginning, from showing that from football games to football, and trying to keep that constant message. But it will take time to re-educate the importance of.
I just think making the community members aware of that it really does impact the everyday finances of our district.
And truly, and on top of that, I mean, we just know from education, the students there, it matters so much when you're in front of that teacher in that classroom working together. So, that messaging, and we, they have done a good job. We'll continue. That is really important. And President Cunningham reminded me, along this attendance lines, we have one more Superintendent Communication Council on May 10th, and already have created the agenda item of how can we increase attendance. So just as that reminder, as we continue to ask community, ask students, ask others, and especially, like you said, at the upper grades too, what can we do? So we'll continue to ask and gather information.
There's no further comment. I wanted to thank the board for, the discussion. It's times like these that, it's good to bounce those ideas off of each other and have that conversation. We don't get a chance to do it enough, but, thank you for, making me think about some things. I feel for our PEAMS person. We're gonna keep them busy over the next couple weeks or so with just scenarios and things like that. Alice, I wanted to thank you. I see Jeff in the audience. Thank you for your department for crunching the numbers and giving us the data that we need, and Cabinet as well for contributing to that. Thank you, for giving us the information, and to also take our feedback and think of those things as you guys go back and interact with your different departments. So thank you. And seeing no further questions or comments, I'll adjourn us at 6:10.